Good morning, everyone. Welcome along to the Altaro and ADM webinar, which is today around 3 essential disaster recovery steps your school needs to consider. Thank you for attending. Just a bit of housekeeping first. What you need to appreciate is that you will all be on mute whilst the session is going on. However, there is you'll see in your control panel, there is a chat window where questions can be asked. And what we will do is we'll look to address them appropriately as we go along. Effectively, the agenda for today is as follows. 1 second. So we're going to cover off what is disaster recovery and sort of go through the premise of what constitutes a disaster. We're also then going to tackle what Altaro can do and can deliver in relation with disaster recovery. So we'll cover the 3 steps that we've mentioned there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how ADM computing can help deliver with regards to Altaro as a product, and also a product that we have worked on in line with Altaro and in line with disaster recovery that we can deliver for organisations in the Southeast. So welcome along, everyone. I'm Patrick. I'm the Senior Account Manager at ADM Computing. I'm also the Education Specialist as well. Keith Joseph, who is the Channel Manager at Altaro, has very kindly given up today to spend some time talking about the Altaro product and to give you a feel for how it can be useful in your not only your backup strategy, but as a part of a disaster recovery solution as well.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Hello, Keith. We have been a partner of Altaro's for some time now. It's a product that has served us very well in terms of delivering backup solutions, and we deal with numerous schools who purchase Altaro software for that usage, whether that be simply for on-site backup, whether that be for backups within the school to different areas of the school. But the really interesting piece with Altaro is the fact that you can do off-site backups, and there are many different iterations of that, which we will cover. Effectively, what we really need to do now is to sort of get into the nitty-gritty of what Altaro can do. So later on, I will talk about a product that we have put together. For now, if I can hand over to Keith, and he will bring us up to speed with regards to what is disaster recovery.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you for the introduction. Just to give you background, I've worked for Altaro for about 3.5 years. Prior to that, I worked in storage in the enterprise space. So I've very much worked around the premise of data and the marketplace that it sits within. So without further ado, let's sort of go. So when we put these things together, they're quite broad brush in relation to the headlines of 3 differentiators for schools around disaster recovery. But quite often it's actually better to try and actually understand what disaster recovery is and what disaster recovery can offer you as organizations. And the interesting thing is that this is orientated towards schools at the moment, but actually disaster recovery is akin to all businesses. And the reason being is that the disaster recovery as such is not an individual product that everybody thinks. So you'll probably see within the IT infrastructure space that people talk about disaster recovery as a service. They talk about that. That is one element of it. Disaster recovery is a mechanism for allowing you to go through the what-if scenario within your school, college environment, because there are a number of different things that may happen. And at the end of the day, it is really about protecting your data and how you get out of instances and problems that may occur with the data. Now, you'll see this slide, it's a little bit busy, but it's to try and get a point across that now, unfortunately, it's an American slide, hence why you've got earthquakes on there. But the general general gist is there is that disaster recovery is 9 times out of 10 is orientated with human error. So it could be that something's happened, you could have accidentally deleted stuff, it could have been that you've been hacked, you've had it all, but then it goes on to other things, which is you have a patch that doesn't take, or you have a power outage. There's so many different things. I mean, to try and give you an example, we've just helped a client in London who has a server room issue because their air conditioning units are on the roof leaked and leaked coolant all over their server base. So there's various different issues, but what happens with disaster recovery is that, as I said, it is that whole question of what happens, what do you do when something happens? It's that what if scenario. And whether it's, as I said, it's human nature or technology issues or business continuity or somebody trying to hack you. I mean, we all hear it these days. It could be WannaCry, it could be, there's so many that you need to go through. So really what we're going to try and look at is the elements that first and foremost is that you need to think about when you're looking to think about disaster recovery. And as I said, it's not about a product, it's about a set of processes, and then the products are then behind them to help you have those processes enabled and actioned as needed. And hopefully, touch wood, you never need to action them. So therefore, they're a set of, very much like when you do a fire drill. You never ever want to enact a fire drill for real, but every now and then the fire alarm will go off, everybody will put their bibs on, you will go outside and you will do it. That's what disaster recovery is. It is the fire drill that goes through. So there's the first thing you really need to think about when you're looking at disaster recovery and the essentials of doing it is the data, which at the end of the day is the most important bit, and the bit we're talking about over and above the process. But the question is that how much data can you afford to lose? Now, in the industry, we call that a recovery point objective. But at the end of the day, it is about how much data can your school, college, or campus afford to lose in the event of a problem. And we won't call them disasters because that's quite a negative word, but a problem as such. So as organizations, you need to understand actually what's the minimum amount we can lose. Now, some systems that you can't afford to lose anything. So therefore, your recovery point would be near to 0 minutes. Other organizations, you can afford to lose a day, you can afford to lose a week. It's not too much of an issue. But what you need to understand is first and foremost, what's the amount of data you can afford to lose? The easiest way of doing it is in minutes, because if not, you end up sort of tying yourself down rounding complete and utter knots. The second thing that you need to take into consideration before you start this is actually how fast do I need the data back? Now, it varies from organization to organization and organizational types. Now, we're talking about school, so it could be that you can afford to have the data down for a day, or if it's in the middle of exams, you can't afford to have it down for very long at all, because it may be an online system that's actually part of the exams. So when you're looking at the situation, it's a case of actually how much data can I afford to lose, and actually how fast can I afford to have it back. And when you're talking about trying to get the data back, that's your RTO. So you'll hear this in the industry, it's your recovery time objective. So what you're looking at is how much data can I afford to lose, and how fast can I get it back? And they're the two key drivers that drive the primaries around your IT infrastructure when people talk about it. And the reason for putting this in is just to make sure that as we talk through, there's an understanding about where we are. Now, the one thing you will find with the IT industry as a whole is that the closer you try to get to that X in the middle, which is the minimum amount of data loss versus the shortest amount of time to get it back, the systems become more and more complicated and become more and more robust, and therefore they become more and more complicated, and therefore by default they actually become more and more expensive. So there's an element of weighing up when you're looking at RPOs and RTOs is that don't just say, I can't afford to lose any data and I want it back now. Because if you do that, that's fine if you've got a bottomless pit of money. But if you don't, what you have to look at is you've got to take a more pragmatic viewpoint and actually look at what type of recovery points, recovery times I need to do. Now, the actual easiest way of doing that is understanding the data that you have and what kinds of data that you have within the campus or the infrastructure. And the reason being is that not all data is equal. That you're going to have some systems that are just archival systems, and you have some systems that are going to be running, for example, SIMs, or running, for example, smart boards of some description that are very, very important to the school and to the running of the school. It could be the register, the attendees. It could be, there's so many different infrastructures that you now have within your organization, that it's a case of actually we need to look at this and we need to understand what we've got. Now, the easiest way of doing that is actually breaking it down. It's if you're looking at the type of data you've got, it gets quite complicated, because you'd look at saying, look, my PDFs are really important, or my PowerPoints, or my this, or my that. It's actually a lot easier to look at what applications are the most important to the organization. And the reason being is that even when you virtualize an infrastructure, you're still putting one application onto one virtual machine. So therefore, it's prioritizing which is the most important VMs to bring back up and giving them a hierarchical viewpoint, and then applying your RTOs and your RPOs at that point, dependent on which VMs are mission critical. So when you're doing your planning, you're sitting there and going, right, VM 1 to 3, they're absolutely, they've got to come back up as fast as we can. So we're going to concentrate our time on that. But VMs 10 to 12, they're not important, so we'll do those as and when we can. So what that's allowing you to do is you're understanding the data, but you're making it easier on yourself to actually implement that and do what you need to do, because at the end of the day, you have to keep it simple, because if you don't keep it simple, it's going to run completely out of control. And the reason being is that you need to understand the resources that you have within your organization. So how many people, when the events of your plan unfortunately gets implemented for whatever reason, do you actually have available to you? And how many people can actually do what you need to do? Now, it's quite an interesting one, that people think, as I said right at the start, that they can just recover everything as fast as they can and they want to lose the minimum data. But to do that, you need a massive team to do that, which, on top of the fact that you're dealing with massive costs of your software, actually starts to really pull on the resources of the organization for something that really you actually don't want to do. So if, as you said before, if you sort of try and look at it and simplify it down into the what if scenario happens. So we're looking at actually what happens if we get a server breakdown, or what happens if one of the kids jams a pencil into the back of the machine because they've got into the server room, or what happens if you had a theft, or what happens if you've had WannaCry, or you've had a ransomware attack. Once you've worked those out, and then the second step is then to say, okay, this data is the most important, but this data is least important, and we've scaled it through. Actually, then who's going to deliver it? How many people have I got to do that? And what do they need to do? And what tools do they need to have in place in order to do that? So there's an element of the understanding what you need to achieve, but keeping it as simple as possible. But then on top of that, there's actually another element to this, which is who is going to support you and who is going to help you. And the reason that that I put this slide in there is the fact that you can't do everything yourself. There is no unless you're running a huge IT department. The likelihood is that you're probably trying to do multiple jobs. You're probably trying to get the phone system up. You're trying to get this. You're trying to get that. You need to look at, when you're looking at your disaster recovery plan and the steps that you're taking with your disaster recovery plan, who is going to support you, and understand what they can offer you. Now, this comes from the support you get from ADM and what they can actually offer you. So when you talk to Patrick and the team, you get a full understanding of what they offer you and what they can give you and what help they can go through. But likewise, what do you get from the vendors? And the reason being is that disasters don't come in the form of odd things happening, as we said right at the start. They could come from a patching issue. So what this means is that you put a patch in and it doesn't take, for whatever reason, it takes down the system. What support is the vendor going to give you? Does the vendor give you the option to raise a ticket? Great. They've hit their SLA, but they don't come back to you for 8 hours because they've hit their SLA and you're in a queue of people to do. Is it the fact that the partner doesn't sell the product or doesn't have an understanding of the product, so therefore can't act as a first line or second line support for you? So when you're looking at your disaster recovery plans and the systems that you need to put in place, it's about understanding the support that is around you that can help you. And as I said, support comes from the partners like ADM and the support they can offer you with the huge team of very gifted guys that they employ in Canterbury, or from vendors like ourselves at Altaro, who actually are here to help you because you pay for that support and therefore you'll deem it. But more importantly, you're entitled to it, and therefore it's about delivering it to you when you need it. The reason being is that nobody ever calls support because to phone up to say, hey, thank you very much, you've done a great job, or I love your product. You phone support because something's happened, and you phone support because you're in a quandary about something that's gone on. What you don't need is somebody saying, yeah, I've just given you a ticket, that's fine, everything's tickety-boo at that point. So you sit there and just go, wow, okay, I didn't need that. What I actually needed is your help. I don't need an email saying, thank you, we've logged your call. And then I don't need to go to first line support, who then say, oh, I'm not sure about that one, then put you to second line support, third line support, fourth line support. What you need is somebody that you can get that can be got hold of immediately and deal with the problem because you're dealing with it. So there's a number of considerations when you're putting your plan together that you need to take into consideration over and above the product that you may choose to do it. It is around the processes that you put in place. It's around the testing. It's around the who's going to support you. It's around the what type of data do I have and how do I implement the data? How do I keep it as simple as possible? There's so many different requirements that you need to think about, but most of it's not product orientated. It's actually about what you do as an organization to make it happen. And then there's a bit that you really need to take into consideration. And the bit you need to consideration is that where are we going to be in the future? Now, the reason being is that if you look at data, data is growing at an exponential rate. So if you take it as your own personal data, if you looked at what you had 10 years ago, you probably had a few songs on the beginnings of a smartphone, maybe the beginnings of an original iPhone or a Nokia, and you had some few bits and pieces, a few photographs of putting through. You now look at data that you have now. You've got your movies used to be on DVDs, now they're probably on MP4 files. We've got videos, we've got movies, we've got our whole life revolves around IT infrastructure. And the same is true with organizations like schools and colleges and the rest of it. Data is growing at an exponential rate. The thing is, what you need to do is you need to understand as an organization, where was I, where have I got to, and that gives you the bones and the beginnings of your planning, but actually where am I going to be? Now, unfortunately with that one, that's a case of sticking your finger in the air and hoping amongst hopeness that you actually get an idea. But what you can do is you can look at trends on how data has grown within the school or the college and say, actually, I've gone from A to B, the likelihood is I'm going to go to C, but I may go to D, and actually try and understand it. And as an organization, is actually getting everybody involved in understanding where the data growth is going through. And we come across organizations where We did one when we implemented deduplication in the US, which is a huge college, and he had 15 terabytes of data, but when they did the analytics of it, we did the deduplication, it went down to under a terabyte. And that's because they looked at the data, when they tried to understand, looked at the data, and they had multiple copies of the same documents and the same environment. So there is an element when you look at the planning, you look at the growth, is actually look at where you've been and actually looking if you can clean the data up. Because the more data you have, the more complicated your disaster recovery plan could end up being if you're not careful, because you may end up with more and more applications that are driving and delivering the data to your organization, and therefore they may have more requirements in relation to the disaster recovery plan that you put in place. And also the fact is it then sort of moves it through in relation to a number of other things. And one of the other things is how much you're willing to pay for it. At the end of the day, as I said right at the start, you end up with a situation of if you want to get as close to the center of the problem, so you've got minimal RTOs and minimal RPOs, it's going to cost you money. And it's going to cost you money because you're going to need a lot of staff, you're going to need lots of decent contracts with your suppliers, whether they be partners like ADM or they're partners like ourselves. And the reason being is that you're asking for some very, very quick results very, very quickly. So therefore, there's an understanding that when you understand what data you've got and where the data sits and when you need it back, that gives you an idea. But you need to be realistic in the relation to do it. Because as human beings, we all sit there and go, do you know something? What do we need and where do we need to get it from? And the standard stock answer is, I want it and I want it now, because that's just the way we are and the way we as human beings we react. The realities is that you need to take a step back and actually look at the situation and go, I can't have everything back now, I can't do this, I can't do that because I can't afford to do it. Actually, what can I do? Well, let's look, and as I said before, let's look at what's the criticality of each VM, when do I need to bring it back, how do I need to do it, and what do I need to do at that point? Okay, and once you understand that, you can then start associating costs. And when you talk to the guys at ADM, they'll sit there and go, yeah, you can do this, but it's going to cost you X. But if you do Y, it's going to cost you a little bit less, blah, blah, blah. And you can come from a plan that A, can fit your budget, but B, and more importantly, fits your requirements as an organization, because you understand your requirements, you understand what needs to happen and how it needs to go. Because without that, as I said, the costings will just run out of control. But more importantly, you won't get what you need for it. And the reasons the costings can potentially run out of control is that when you look at the triangle of business continuity, disaster recovery planning, what we're looking to do, which is the server storage and networking and the data backup, is actually the foundation to the plan. But you've got, as you go up the pyramid and you get up bits and pieces, and you start looking at alternate sites and recovery processes, you know, those two start to add cost and complexity to the environment, but they start adding, you know, that's the policy layer of what you need to do. But then when you start doing testing and you've got the planning and then the risk management, it just starts to add up. But these are the type of things that you need to take into consideration. Yes, you've got your servers, you've got your storage, you've got your network. Yes, I've got a backup, but have I got the ability to offsite? Have I got an alternative site? Have I got a plan? You know, can I test it? Can I validate it? What's the risk? What's the policies? And as I said before, it really is driven around, if you're looking at disaster recovery, really is looking at the fire bell test. You know, when the fire bell goes off, your teachers know exactly what they need to do. They need to put their yellow jackets on, they need to round up the children, they need to count the children, they walk in an orderly manner to a pre-assigned point, they stand there, they take a register. Once the register is then taken, they then report back to the head or to the head of department that everybody's accounted for. The fire brigade turn up, they can then report to the fire brigade, and they know everybody's safe, they know exactly what's happened, they know it through. Disaster recovery planning is no different. It is about taking those steps through what happens is, and you need to look at it in relation to exactly the same thing, which is if I have a ransomware attack, what do I need to do? What's going to happen? What are the consequences? What data do I need to protect? What data don't I need to protect? If I have a flood, if I have a theft, it's just simple planning that goes with it. And then behind that, you need to do it. So looking at that, you now got disaster recovery and you sort of understand where you need to go. What you need to then understand is what type of disaster recovery plans can you put in place from an IT standpoint. So effectively, there are 7 that you'll go through, and I'll go through these. And you need to understand what's the right protection level for you. We can't, as organisations, tell you what's right. You guys need to understand what's right and what's wrong, and you guys need to decide what's the right level. And it may be that you look, as I said before, you look at data and you actually assign different plans to different types of data, i.e. different VMs. That's fine, that can be done. But again, you have an understanding of what you need to do. So if we look at the first one, have no disaster recovery plan at all. You'll be surprised how many companies and how many schools and how many colleges are in this environment. The basics is that it's on their to-do list. They understand they need to get on with it. They just don't get on with it. And you see this all the time within a lot of companies, not bigger companies, to be brutally honest with you, because they have IT managers and they have insurance policies that ensure that they have to have this in place. It's normally mid-tier local authority where you do have the situation where it's one of those where something's got to give. So yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that next month. I'll do that next quarter. I'll do that next year because I need to do it. Fine. If you're comfortable as an organisation not to have a disaster recovery plan at all, fine. Because we're not here to judge and we're not here to tell you what you shouldn't be doing. We're just saying that we're actually here to ask you the question: how important is your data to the campus? And if you lose it, what are the consequences? Because if you lose data from a student that's been working on a project for 12 months and you can't get it back, you're going to have some very, very angry parents and very, very angry teachers and very, very angry school boards trying to actually understand why this child is potentially going to have to start again and do what he needs to do. Likewise, if you've got archival information that's been lost and something happens where, and we all see the news these days, where you need to pull some information back and you can't pull it back, people start asking questions. So there's an element of self-preservation in the whole thing, but there's also an element that it's just good housekeeping. At the end of the day, as we said right at the start, what's the most important data you've got and where does that data live and what do you need to do with it? Now, if you've got a plan, that's fine. Now, that plan could be is that I take my most important data and I copy it to floppy disks. That's okay. That's a very, very old technology to do, but you could be comfortable with that. That's part of your plan, and you know full well it'll work. Likelihood is you'll not find a machine that'll have a floppy disk these days, but that just shows my age. But likewise, you as long as you understand what's going through, but that's having no plan is basically opening yourself up to a whole world of pain. Now, you may not have a disaster recovery plan, but you've got a good backup procedure. And this is the minimum entry level that you need to get to. This is where, yes, I've got backups. I know what the data is. I just back up everything. I just keep it really, really simple, and it does what I need to do. Now you're beholden to how good your backup product is, but at least you've got the beginnings of a situation. Now, the good thing is that you've got a procedure because you back up everything X amount of times a day, and you do something with it. It could be that you're putting it onto cartridges. It could be that you're doing it. At least you're doing it. The question is that you now need to take a bigger look at the situation and say, In the event of a recovery needing to happen, what do I need to do as an organization? Now, likewise, it could be that I've taken a backup, but actually, have I taken into consideration that the backup might have corrupted? So yes, I've got a good backup procedure, but what happens if something goes wrong and actually the backups can't be recovered? There's a question. What do I do at that point? Well, the obvious answer is you go back to the next backup and you try and take that one, and you go to the next backup until you find one that works. But every time you go back you go back to recovery points, you're going further away from the point of the disaster. So the question is, at that point, what impact does that have on my organization? Now, a simple answer could be, yeah, I've got a good backup procedure. Maybe what I do is I add to the procedure, and at the beginning of a disaster recovery plan, and I ask ADM to come in every month and test my backups. Or they set it up so at least once a month the backups are tested. So actually I do know that I've got uncorrupted backups in the organization. They could do a simple health check. But again, you've got this whole situation of the backups being stored. Do I actually put the backups to an offsite location? Now, it could be that and again, we'll cover this off a bit later on, do I sort of shove it off into a cloud environment, or do I shove it off to the headmaster's home, or do I put it into ADM as an organization? Again, you've got the foundations with having a good backup procedure. What you need to do is look at, as I said before, the what if scenario. What happens if something goes wrong? What happens if it sort of moves forward? So you just need to think it through in relation to do that, and test it and just make sure that everybody's happy with it. Now, the middle one is, of course, is that I have a backup plan, but I have no resources in place. And that's actually not a bad situation to be in. What that is that you end up with a situation where at least I have a plan, I know exactly what I'm doing, but I don't have any spare capacity within the organization. That doesn't matter. This goes back to what we talked about earlier around support. So you look at that from a from a supplier standpoint, and you'd say to ADM, as an example, look, I've got this procedure, this is what we're going to do, but I've got no flexibility. In the event of a ransomware attack, how can you help me, and what can you do, and what's it going to entail to do that? And they will help you, and they will move through. But what they're doing is that you're looking at scenarios. Now, as I said before, you don't want these scenarios ever to play out, but you've thought them through. So I have a plan that's saying, if I have a ransomware attack, what do I need to do? Well, I have no spare capacity to rip it all down and start again, but actually have a backup procedure. What can we do to actually get us around this? I have a hardware failure. Actually, how fast could I potentially get another server if I need one? Do people have spare servers that they can lend me whilst we fix the old server? Is there this, that? But the thing is that you've thought it through in relation that I may have a fan go down, I may have a disk go down, I may have a motherboard go down. It could take 24 hours, 48 hours to get a new board. What do I do in response to that? Now, it could be that if you lose a server, you have the ability to instantly fire up a backup, which is great, but what do I put it to? Well, talk to your supplier and just say, hey, I need you to lend me a machine just while I fire it up. We'll plug it into the network, we'll get everybody up and running, we'll do what we need to do. When the new machine's up and running, built, tested and sorted, we'll port it all back to the old one. We'll export the virtual machine out, we'll import it into the new one, we'll have a downtime over lunchtime, but then we're up and running. So I have no resources in place, but I know what I'm doing in the event of something happening. And again, there's a key driver with talking to the suppliers and the support that you get from the suppliers to make sure that they give you what you need when you need it on the plan, because you won't have time to argue with them about this, that, and the other, what you need to do. So you want to get the systems up and running and worry about the consequences afterwards. Then when you start getting to larger type environments, as we spoke before, you then start looking at cold site disaster recovery. So this is where you have the ability to replicate out from, for example, your main site onto another site. Now that could be into your supplier's data center, it could be into one of the cloud suppliers' data center, it could be into another campus. So if you're part of a multi-academy trust, you could replicate from one school to another, and the school could replicate back. There's various different ways of doing it, but again, cold site disaster recovery solution is a great solution, but what it means is that, again, you need to plan. In the event of you losing a server and you don't have the resources in the main site, you flick it over, that's fine. You flick it over to the secondary site and you're off and running, but then how do you connect? How do the students get hold of their data? How do they do it through? What's the pass-through mechanism that you're going to reroute them through? If the firewalls allow it to do it, is it a sealed environment? Is in fact this, so it's not just a case of I have site A and site B, I move it through. It's actually about what happens behind that. And again, we go back into we lose the motherboard, or we lose this, that, and the other. We have a flood in the server room. I can fire it over to the other school. Oh, actually, nobody can get hold of it because I don't have enough bandwidth in my internet connectivity. The ports won't let me through because it's a sealed environment because I've got security concerns. So therefore, what's the point of doing that? Because I've got the data in another place, it's all up and running, but nobody can access it. So you need to just sort of go through and understand the processes behind moving the data, which is fine. But again, we go back to disaster recovery is a set of processes, not a product. And once you've got those set of processes in place, how do you move it and what do you do? So it's about doing this. Now, some people call this true disaster recovery because it gives you that particular, they call it lights on, lights off. The issue is that this starts to get quite expensive in relation to if you're buying individual box products that can do this, where they supply a massive component chassis that slots into your rack, and then they supply another one at the other site that does all the work for you, and the whole thing is automated. You don't need to do that, but because there are processes in place that allow you to do it, but it's about working with your suppliers and working with suppliers and the vendors to make sure that it gives you everything you need in relation to that ability to fail over. Then of course, then we start to get to split site. So when you start getting to this is when you're starting to go to big corporate type environments. So it's the same with warm sites, split sites. It basically means that you're splitting the load between two data centers. So it's one of those things. It's completely it's out there. You can get it if you want to. If you've got a situation, it could be that you may be dealing with a university where they're doing some very, very mission critical type technology that they need this. The likelihood is that you're not, and even more so with hot sites. And a hot site is absolutely it's the premium level of disaster recovery. It's normally the guys with banks and people at that sort of level that do that, but it's something that's out there that if you need to do it, and a hot site basically is that it's instantaneous failover. You lose a VM in location A, it fires up in location B. Nobody in the organization knows any difference, but then you're looking at big bucks to do it. But it could be that within the organization, within your campus, that you may have an application that needs this, so it can be done, but you have to be prepared to pay for it in some shape or form. But the likelihood is that if you're contemplating it, there's a need, because you've looked at the disaster recovery process, you've looked at what needs to happen with this particular data set, and therefore you need to look at it. So again, you need to talk to it. So what you need to do really is look at what protection level's right for you, understand what protection level's right for you, and then talk to ADM. And these guys will then actually help you and point you in the right direction. That's their skill, and their forte to do that is really to add value to your plan and actually implement your plan and make sure that your plan does what it's supposed to do. But you need your plan in place to start with to give them the heads up to help you. So you need to understand what data is important, what you expect from the data, what RTOs and RPOs you need from it, and what level each data set needs to be at accordance with what the requirements are from the local authority or from the Department of Education or from the bursar or from the head. So you just need to make sure that you understand what disaster recovery can offer you. So if we quickly just look at the product, what I'll do is I'll skirt through this quite quickly because I've got 3 scenarios that we can put in place where Altero can help you implement sort of the first parts of your disaster recovery. We can go right the way through to hot site if you need to with some clever coding, but at the end of the day, we don't need to do that. What we'll try and do is we'll try and show you some examples where we can implement and actually show you what's right, you know, what can help you go through. So the product set that we offer virtualization for, we offer backup for virtualized infrastructure. We offer physical backup for server virtual, and we offer backup for Office 365 if you have that in place. The guys at ADM will be able to talk you through and do everything you need to do. The company itself, we run to 4 core values. Everything we do is designed to be easy to use. Everything is supported to the highest level, and I'm going to cover that off in a second. We don't market in a traditional manner. If you go onto our website, it's all educational. So if you want to have learn some subject matter around VMware, vSAN, we'll have information that's free of charge. There'll be webinars, there'll be ebooks that allow you to do that. We employ Matter experts for Hyper-V and for VMware to do that. And we don't sell direct to you guys. We always sell through the likes of ADM to make sure that you get the value out of service, because at the end of the day, we produce a product, they produce a service, that service is there to help you, especially around disaster recovery. Just on the support side of it, our support is world class. It is available through ADM or actually direct from yourself. We only have basically 2 levels of support. You either are support or you're not. You either so we don't have gatekeepers, so we don't have level 1, level 2, level 3. We just have engineers. So if you go through ADM and they need to get an answer, they get an answer very, very quickly. We're failing at the moment. Our chat bot, it's not a bot, it's actually a real person. Our chat is running at about 20 seconds at the moment. It's normally around about 10. So we're a little bit lax on that one, but I think you'll give us 20 seconds as compared to some companies that are 4 hours or 8 hours. I think we're in the realms of trying to help you out. If you go onto our website and you scroll to the bottom, you go to support, altero.com support, go to the bottom. Support is ultimately managed by our CEO. It is the most important thing to our organization. So you're more than welcome to check that out. But again, I would do that in conjunction with ADM. If you look at our products, it is an enterprise class product and gives you all the enterprise class features that you would expect. So you can do hot and live backups, you can do guest OSs, you can do Linux, Unix, you could even do Mac OS if you've got it on a virtual machine. Would never recommend that because Apple have a tendency to go a bit bonkers on that one. We can backup Exchange, although most people are now moving to 365. It is encrypted, and it is also military grade encryption. So it's compressed, but it has military grade encryption to 256. So it gives you all of the enterprise class functionality you want. We've also added into the products deduplication, as is an inline deduplication. So what it means is that you don't have to have additional disks to the side as you would with a post process. It basically means it's reducing your cost levels and moving it through, and it's non-taxing, so it doesn't take up a resource. What it does do though, it saves you money on disk space, because we can save anything between 60 and 75% of the disk space based on the deduplication engine. There is always a caveat with that. It is subject to the data type, so we just go through that. If you've got more mission critical data sets that you're looking to do, so going back to our RPO argument, we can actually bring you this down to recovery points of 5 minutes, so you could lose 5 minutes worth of it. Talk to ADM, they'll explain continuous data protection. You'd only ever implement it for absolute mission critical applications. But what it means is that for a 4-hour period from the point of failure, you can roll back 5-minute increments back until you find a point that you're comfortable with. Again, enterprise class functionality. This is game changing for the mid-tier marketplace. You know, the fact that we can bring your RPOs down to 5 minutes is unheard of. You normally pay tens of thousands of pounds for this. We'll help you implement it. The same with replication. We have replication pre-built into it. So again, it's about bringing your RPOs down if you get time. Like everything else with replication, it needs additional resources. So again, when you're looking at your DR infrastructure in your plan, it goes back to, I have a DR plan but no resources. Replication may not be an option within your own organization, but maybe an option within ADM's infrastructure. So therefore, there may be some conversations you can have with the guys at ADM. The great thing is it's about zero restore time. So I say it's about bringing those RPOs right down to where you need to be. So again, it's about what is the most mission critical data that I've got. You've got the ability to replicate into Azure. I know Microsoft do like to give free accounts out, but again, it's the beginning of going through, and I will cover this off a little bit later on. If you've got a larger type organization, i.e. an academy where you've got multiple schools, we can give you the ability to manage all those schools remotely through the Cloud Management Console. 9 times out of 10, though, ADM would do this on your behalf. So don't worry about this, and it will give you real-time, up-to-date, multi-tenanted environment that you can manage remotely. Effectively, it saves you running out in the car and having to go check the backups because you can see it real time. The realities are you don't do that, you get ADM to do that for you because that just makes it easier and it means it's one sort of job that's less for you to do. So if we start going back and looking at what types of recovery structures that you need to have in place, the first one is just a very, very simple backup and recovery solution that can be put in place on campus. So this will allow you to, in this example, we've got Hyper-V and VMware. As I said, we can add physical to this. We can add 365, but I'm just going to talk about the main products just on the relevances of time. What happens is that you deploy our product onto virtual machine or onto a physical machine, and you give us some disk. Now, the argument is that why do we have on-premise disk as opposed to cloud disk? Well, it goes back to, we're talking about disaster recovery. If you are dealing with cloud, you are dependent on the connectivity, the data set size, and how fast you can pull the data back. That can take anything from a couple of hours to a few days to pull it back. The fastest recovery point you always have is from primary disk that's attached locally because it's the fastest connectivity. You can shield this if you need to. So if you've got ransomware attacks, you can hide the drives, especially using NAS boxes. ADM will show you how to do that. There are mechanisms, there are tools that you can put in place to make sure that the primary disk is never corrupted. But it gives you the whole access to do it. It gives you a very simple, easy to deploy solution that will give you all of the functionalities we've talked about. Again, Patrick, as your lead from ADM, can go into the details of that. I don't really want to go into the details, but that is your backbone to your recovery plan. So you have your processes in place, and then you have the ability to know which VM can be recovered, when, where, and how. So this gives you the backbone of where you need to go on top of the processes that you put in place and the processes that you've tested. The next stage is that you could call this belt and braces, you can call it, you know, what you like, but at the end of the day, you still have your on-premise offering that you had previously, but you now add the ability to add a copy into, in this case, Azure. So pre-built into the product is the ability to replicate straight out to Azure. And what that means is that from a compliancy standpoint, so if Ofsted come in or any of those guys come in and say, yes, I can see that you've got your data locally, I can see that it's protected, I can see it's passworded on a dedicated NAS or a dedicated SAN or whatever, or direct attached storage, whatever you choose to put in place, what happens in the what if somebody nicks it all? You go, that's fine, I've got it in Azure, we know we've got the data. What's the process for that? Well, we know it's going to take a long time to come out, but we never plan to use it because we've got these other security elements implemented. So therefore, it gives you the first part of belt and braces in relation that, hey, I can now put this into Azure. I now know I've got the data into 2 places. So this can be an absolute minimum in case of I've got fast recovery and I've got the what if scenario really next it. So it gives you that real beginnings of disaster recovery and business continuity offering abilities within your organization. The other way of doing it, of course, is to implement it straight into a secondary site where you have the ability to add some additional functions. So we have the ability to use a piece of code called the offsite server. ADM can host that on your behalf in their data center. And what that gives you the ability to do is do the instant boots, boot from backup. It's fully encrypted. It gives you a mid-tier connectivity, mid-tier disaster recovery option. Now, you may choose to do this for maybe 1 or 2 virtual machines that you've identified as your most mission critical data. But what it does, it gives you what you need outside of the organization. And then when you talk to ADM, you use the scenario, what do we need to do if I need to connect everybody to this? I need to connect everybody to this. And what they will do is they will then implement a mechanism for connecting to that data, whether they're firing up in their own data center or have the ability to maybe pick up the storage that they've got held for you, copy it back and actually run it back in a car if they want to for the quickest mechanism, or they send it back depending on the connectivity they need to do it. Or if they're rebuilding a server, they can pull the data straight from their data set and put it straight back on the new server. And then when they deliver the server, it's off and running. There's so many different options this gives you, but so many different levels that you can apply to your disaster recovery plan. And then, of course, the last one is then your belt and braces, where you've got lots of things disappearing off into Azure, but you've got your mission criticals into ADM. So this gives you actually the best of both worlds. It gives you the ability to say, I've got all my data off-site, but I've got my mission criticals ready to remove down. So this is absolutely reducing your RTOs and your RPOs to absolute minimums that you can get away with within a cost-effective environment, which is what we work in. And then if you've got a multi-academy trust, for example, where you've got your own data center, you could have multiple schools into your own data center or again into ADM's data center. So it gives you absolutely everything that you need. But again, it gives you the access via the CMC. It gives you everything. And again, ADM can manage this on behalf of you. But if you've got a situation within the schools environment where you want to manage yourself because you've got a larger team, because you've got maybe 20, 30 schools, and we have schools that do this themselves, where they like to manage it, but then they have an overlay from the partner. We're happy to do that. So there's many different things that we can do with that one. So again, there's multiple options that we can offer you from a business continuity and a disaster recovery standpoint that can help you. But again, we're not here to say one shoe fits all. It's a case of we will build with ADM around your plan and what your process and what your procedures are asking you to do, because that's what's coming from from the school and the rest of it and the requirements of the school. And on that note, I think I've talked enough. I'm going to pass you back to Patrick, and I shall let him carry on. Patrick.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, brilliant. Really appreciate that. So as you can see, or as you can appreciate from what Keith said, there are so many different ways that you can approach disaster recovery, and we can use Altaro to actually build out something that will be appropriate to a disaster recovery plan. We can discuss those in more detail. On the next slide, I just want to actually talk about something relating to a backup as a service product that we do. Taking back to something that Keith said earlier, is in the event of a total disaster where your server estate and your on-site backup are completely wiped out, you're in a bad place. So what we have put together is a solution that allows you to have Altaro backup not only to on-site, but obviously to an off-site location. That would be storage based at ADM. We can scale that according to your needs. It's backed up over the net, so it's and it's encrypted and it's protected as it needs to be. And essentially, the reason we've gone for this really simple solution is for those people that really don't know what to do with disaster recovery, but need to know that their data is somewhere. And the main reason for this is that, especially if I'm talking to schools here, perhaps more in the southeast, is that we can actually host the storage here. It's dedicated to you, it's rented to you, and in the event of a disaster, everything goes really badly wrong, we can pick up that storage, we can bring it to you, we can bring servers to you, we can get you back up and running, and you know, you're in a really strong place. It's a really simple solution, but something that we would obviously want to discuss and work with you on. So that covers our backup as a service. Obviously, we can sell Altaro software for you to manage yourselves, and we also have the ability to create different scenarios according to what you'd like to achieve. If we go on to the next slide, basically what I would like to now ask is if there's any questions or anything that people would like to pose. Obviously, we do have the chat window there that people can use to pose those questions, and we can get Keith to answer any of those. Obviously, if we don't have any questions, what we can do is we can just move on. I can send out my contact details afterwards, but they are on the next screen. So it doesn't look like at this stage there's any questions, which Keith means that we've either been really good at explaining what we need to get across, or everyone's asleep. I'm not sure which, but from that perspective, I think we're coming up to the time where if there aren't any questions, and I'm going to reiterate this, I'm not seeing any pop up here. Apologies if we're missing something. Then we will look to wrap up. So it really remains for me to say thank you, Keith. Really excellent presentation, really helpful. We have recorded this session, and we will be putting this out on our YouTube channel. We will send the links out to that. But if you wanted someone to actually else to see and understand what we've explained today, then that would be really useful. Keith?
Yeah, no, I was just saying from my side, thank you very much for the time. You've got Patrick's details that we've popped up on the screen. My details are on the screen as well. So please feel free to contact us. Patrick's probably your best lead on this one, and then we're here to help and support as needed. And say from my side, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, Keith. Really appreciate that.
All right, guys, thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you soon.